What happens when the sharpest mind of his age loses trust in his own reason? When a man praised as a genius suddenly abandons fame, fortune, and power, vanishing into silence? This is the story of Al-Ghazali, a philosopher who broke philosophy itself. There are moments in human history when a single mind becomes a battlefield, where doubt and faith, reason and revelation, logic and mysticism collide with such force that entire civilizations feel the aftershocks. The story of Al-Ghazali is not just the story of a scholar, or a theologian, or a philosopher. It is the story of a man who dared to push reason to its breaking point, who tasted the limits of philosophy, and who walked into the abyss of doubt only to emerge with a vision of truth that would forever reshape the way we think about knowledge, morality, and the human soul. But why should we care about Al-Ghazali today, nearly 1,000 years after his death? Perhaps because we too live in an age obsessed with certainty and knowledge. We believe that with enough data, enough science, enough calculation, we can explain everything: who we are, why we are here, what we should do. Yet beneath this confidence lies the same anxiety that haunted Al-Ghazali, the fear that reason alone cannot carry the weight of existence. Al-Ghazali was born in 1058 in Tus, in present-day Iran. Orphaned at a young age, he was taken under the care of a Sufi friend of his father, who recognized his brilliance and ensured that he was educated. From early on, his intellect blazed like fire. He studied law, theology, and eventually philosophy. His hunger for knowledge was relentless. By his mid-30s, he had risen to the pinnacle of intellectual life, teaching at the Nizamiya school in Baghdad, one of the most prestigious institutions of the Islamic world. Crowds flocked to hear him. His reputation spread across lands. His name carried weight and authority. Yet, at the height of his success, something within him began to crack. He confesses in his autobiographical masterpiece, Deliverance from Error. That doubt began to gnaw at him. He wondered, how can I know with certainty that what I believe is true? The sciences he had mastered, the arguments he had sharpened, the applause he received, all began to feel like sand slipping through his fingers. This doubt was not casual. It was devastating. He began to question even the most basic principles of reason. Could he trust his senses? After all, they often deceive. Could he trust his rational faculty? Perhaps an even higher power could be deceiving him. He was haunted by the possibility that everything he knew might be false. It was a crisis so severe that it paralyzed him. One day, while lecturing, his tongue literally refused to speak. His body broke down under the weight of doubt. Doctors could not heal him because his illness was not of the body but of the soul. So he left it all. His wealth, his fame, his prestigious post. He abandoned them and wandered. For years he lived in seclusion, moving between Damascus, Jerusalem, and Mecca. And it was in this wandering, in solitude and silence, that he discovered what philosophy had failed to give him. He turned to Sufism, not as an abstract idea, but as a lived reality. Through discipline, prayer, and mystical experience, he found a certainty that reason had denied him. He describes this moment as a light cast into the heart by God, a certainty beyond argument, a knowledge that does not wobble when questioned. But Al-Ghazali did not stop there. His rejection of philosophy was not a dismissal of intellect itself. He had mastered philosophy too well to simply discard it. In his famous work, The Incoherence of the Philosophers, he launched a devastating critique of the philosophers of his time, particularly Avicenna and Al-Farabi, who had tried to harmonize Greek philosophy with Islamic theology. He accused them of overreaching, of pretending to know what cannot be known. On 20 key issues, he declared them mistaken. On 3, he branded them as outright heretics. These 3 were central: the belief that the universe is eternal, the claim that God does not know particular events, and the denial of bodily resurrection. For Al-Ghazali, these were not small slips. They were dangerous errors that tore at the very fabric of religious truth. Yet even as he attacked philosophy, he admitted its usefulness. Logic was indispensable. Mathematics and the natural sciences, he said, were not to be rejected. What he opposed was metaphysical arrogance, the attempt of the human mind to storm the heavens and claim knowledge of what lies beyond its reach. Philosophy, he argued, is like a ladder that allows us to climb, but beyond a certain point, the ladder ends. To insist that it reaches the sky is to deceive oneself. His critique shook the philosophical community so deeply that it provoked a famous response. Ibn Rushd, known in the West as Averroes, wrote The Incoherence of the Incoherence, defending philosophy against Al-Ghazali's charges. The debate between these two men symbolized the larger conflict between reason and faith, a debate that still rages in different forms today. But Al-Ghazali was not content with tearing down. He also sought to rebuild. In his monumental work, Ihya Ulum al-Din, the revival of the religious sciences, he turned his attention to the inner life, to morality, ethics, and the purification of the soul. This was no ordinary book. It was a vast synthesis of law, theology, Sufism, and practical guidance, written not for philosophers in ivory towers but for ordinary seekers of truth. Here, Al-Ghazali redefined morality not as a set of external rules, but as an inner transformation. For him, true ethics begins with the heart. Outward actions mean nothing without sincerity, without intention. A man who prays for show is further from God than one who does not pray at all. A deed without purity of intention is like a body without a soul. He insisted that every virtue, honesty, humility, generosity, must be cultivated inwardly until it becomes the natural fragrance of the heart. This focus on intention was revolutionary. It meant that morality is not merely about compliance but about authenticity. He also emphasized balance. Human beings, he taught, are composed of three faculties: the rational, the appetitive, and the irascible. Each has its role, but each can lead to disaster if unbalanced. The rational faculty seeks knowledge, but can fall into pride. The appetitive faculty seeks pleasure, but can drown in greed. The irascible faculty defends, but can erupt in anger. Virtue, for Al-Ghazali, lies in harmonizing these faculties under the guidance of reason illuminated by faith. In this harmony, he saw the true meaning of justice, not merely social justice, but inner justice, the ordering of the soul. What makes his vision so profound is that it is both mystical and practical. He did not only speak of abstract ideals, he prescribed concrete practices to train the soul. Just as the body needs discipline to become strong, the heart needs discipline to become pure. He recommended fasting, prayer, silence, and charity not as empty rituals, but as exercises to weaken the ego and awaken the spirit. And this is where Al-Ghazali becomes more than a historical figure. His struggle is our struggle. We too are torn between reason and faith, between ambition and humility, between appearance and reality. We too seek certainty in a world that constantly slips through our fingers. Al-Ghazali's rejection of philosophy was not the rejection of thinking, but the rejection of illusion. The illusion that reason can answer every question, that logic can satisfy the hunger of the soul. What he discovered and what he tried to share is that true wisdom comes when the heart and mind are united, when intellect bows not in defeat but in humility before the infinite. Before the infinite. He did not stop at critique. He rebuilt a moral psychology and a spiritual method for living. His works would influence theologians, jurists, mystics, and philosophers for centuries. He reshaped the way the Islamic world thought about certainty and the limits of reason. His critique also provoked responses that kept philosophy alive in different forms. The clash with Ibn Rushd symbolized the ongoing tension between reason and faith. It was not a simple victory for either side. It was a complex conversation that enriched both traditions. Al-Ghazali redefined morality as inner transformation rather than mere external compliance. He taught that sincerity of intention, humility, and balance are the essence of a moral life. His prescriptions were practical, exercises of the soul that anyone could perform to cultivate inner virtue. Small acts, performed with purity of intention, change the heart. Reason is a ladder, useful for climbing. But it is not the same as the final vision. Al-Ghazali urged humility at the ladder's top, an openness to a light that reason cannot compel. Why does this matter now? Because we still wrestle with the same challenges. We still overreach when we pretend to know everything. We still neglect the heart when we worship method. Al-Ghazali's work invites a posture: curiosity without arrogance, reason without idolization, practice without pretense. It asks us to cultivate sincerity, to order our souls, and to be honest about what we can and cannot know. He taught that justice begins within. The ordering of one's own faculties yields a just life outwardly. Inner justice ripples outward into how we treat others. When intellect bows before the infinite, it does not collapse. It finds a wiser, humbler role. This humility preserves reason's gifts while protecting us from its overreach. For seekers of wisdom, Al-Ghazali offers methods, not dogmas, practices, not proofs alone. He invites us to test ideas by lived transformation, by the taste of renewed character. What Al-Ghazali shows is that the deepest questions of meaning demand more than clever arguments. They demand an ordered soul, honest intention, and the courage to admit the limits of our reasoning. His life moved from dazzling intellect to crippling doubt, to a discipline that reclaimed meaning. It is a path from spectacle to sincerity. If we take anything from Al-Ghazali, let it be this: to think deeply, but to live humbly; to value reason, but not to idolize it; to cultivate the heart so that knowledge serves the good rather than feed the ego. When Al-Ghazali turned his attention to the question of morality, he did something extraordinary. He took a tradition often dominated by external law and intellectual debate, and he asked, what is the state of the heart behind the act? For him, the essence of ethics was not what others see, but what God sees. And God, he insisted, does not look at our forms or our wealth, but at our hearts and our intentions. This is why his Ihya Ulum al-Din, the revival of the religious sciences, was such a revolutionary work. Across 4 massive volumes, Al-Ghazali restructured the very way people thought about religion. He divided the work into 4 parts: acts of worship, social customs, the destructive vices of the heart, and the virtues that heal the soul. But what made the Ihya truly powerful was not just its scope, but its integration. He wove together theology, law, philosophy, and mysticism into a single tapestry. For him, religion was not fragmented disciplines, it was a way of being. Take, for example, his treatment of prayer. Many before him had written about prayer as a legal obligation: when to pray, how to pray, what invalidates it. Al-Ghazali did not deny these rules, but he went deeper. He asked, what is prayer without presence? What is prayer without humility? A body can bow and prostrate, but if the heart is absent, if the mind is wandering, then the act is an empty shell. True prayer, he said, is when the heart stands before God as though seeing him, with trembling awe and intimate love. Or consider his writings on wealth. Many scholars warned against greed or instructed on the rules of charity. Al-Ghazali acknowledged this, but again he asked, what is the root of greed? For him, greed is not about gold or silver. It is about an attachment in the heart, a disease of the soul that blinds us to sufficiency. Charity, then, is not just about giving coins. It is about freeing the heart from the prison of attachment, about tasting the joy of generosity. This focus on inner transformation led him to redefine the very meaning of virtue. Virtue was not mechanical obedience, nor was it mere philosophical moderation. It was the flowering of the heart in alignment with the divine. Every vice, whether arrogance, envy, or hypocrisy, is a veil that hides the light of God from shining within us. Every virtue, patience, gratitude, humility, removes a veil, until the heart becomes a polished mirror reflecting divine reality. What makes Al-Ghazali's moral philosophy so rich is that it is at once psychological, spiritual, and practical. Long before modern psychology, he analyzed the mechanisms of the self, the tricks of the ego, the ways desire can disguise itself as virtue. He warned against the hypocrisy of religious scholars who seek fame, the arrogance of ascetics who pride themselves on humility, the self-deception of those who serve others while secretly craving praise. For him, the most dangerous enemy is not external, it is the ego within, forever whispering illusions. At the same time, he never left his reader with despair. Every disease of the soul, he said, has a cure. Just as doctors study illnesses to heal the body, spiritual doctors must diagnose the ailments of the heart to heal the soul. Anger can be restrained by patience, envy can be softened by love, arrogance can be dissolved by remembering our fragile mortality. His writings are filled with prescriptions: fasting to tame desire, silence to restrain the tongue, service to cleanse pride, meditation on death to awaken humility. He believed that no heart is beyond healing, if only it turns sincerely toward God. And it is here that Al-Ghazali's rejection of philosophy connects most deeply with his vision of morality. Philosophy in his time often sought truth in abstract metaphysical systems, essences, substances, categories. Al-Ghazali turned the gaze inward. What good is it to know the structure of the heavens if one's heart is diseased with greed and arrogance? What use is it to debate eternity if one cannot be kind to one's neighbor? For him, the true test of knowledge is not intellectual brilliance but moral transformation. Knowledge that does not purify the soul is not knowledge at all. It is a kind of poison, inflating the ego and blinding the heart. Yet Al-Ghazali was not anti-intellectual. His writings sparkle with logic, clarity, and precision. He used philosophy to critique philosophy, just as a surgeon uses a scalpel to remove disease. But he insisted that intellect alone cannot save us. The intellect, he said, is like a lamp. It shines, it illuminates, it shows the path. But a lamp cannot walk the path for you. For that you need the will, the heart, and ultimately, the grace of God. Perhaps one of his most moving insights is his meditation on death. He urged his readers to remember death daily, not as morbid obsession, but as liberation. To remember death, he said, is to remember what truly matters. Titles, wealth, arguments, all vanish in the grave. What remains is the state of the heart and the sincerity of one's deeds. Death strips away illusion, and so to live with the awareness of death is to live authentically, free from the games of ego. This consciousness of mortality led him to redefine ethics in terms of eternity. For many philosophers, morality was about social harmony or rational virtue. For Al-Ghazali, morality was preparation for the meeting with God. Every act is weighed, every intention exposed, every heart revealed. To live morally, then, is not just to live well among humans, but to live in constant awareness of the divine gaze. His influence did not end with his death in 1111. For centuries, his writings shaped the intellectual and spiritual landscape of the Islamic world. His Ihya became one of the most widely read books after the Quran itself. His critique of philosophy set the stage for later debates between faith and reason. Even in the West, his ideas traveled, translated into Latin, influencing thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, who grappled with many of the same questions about reason and revelation. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of Al-Ghazali is not in books or debates, but in the mirror he holds up to every seeker of truth. His life is a testimony to the fact that doubt is not the enemy of faith. It can be its doorway. His crisis of skepticism was not a failure. It was the necessary breaking of illusions, the shattering of false certainties, so that a deeper certainty could emerge. He showed that true knowledge is not found in the arrogance of claiming to know all things, but in the humility of recognizing the limits of reason and opening the heart to the infinite. And so his story remains hauntingly relevant. We too chase certainty in data, in science, in technology. We too are tempted by the arrogance of thinking we can explain everything, control everything, master everything. And we too feel the same restlessness, the same unease that haunted Al-Ghazali. That reason, no matter how sharp, cannot quench the thirst of the soul. Perhaps that is why his writings on morality still resonate. In a world drowning in information, he calls us back to wisdom. In a culture obsessed with appearances, he calls us back to intention. In a society consumed by desire, he calls us back to simplicity. And in an age terrified of death, he calls us to remember it, not as an enemy, but as a guide. To walk with Al-Ghazali is to walk the path of a man who reached the summit of intellect, only to realize it was not the summit of truth. It is to share in his courage, his despair, his surrender, and his discovery of a certainty beyond words. His rejection of philosophy was not the end of philosophy, but its purification, its humbling, its reorientation toward what truly matters. And perhaps that is the lesson he leaves us, that the greatest knowledge is not knowing about truth, but being transformed by truth. The goal is not to construct perfect arguments, but to become a soul polished until it reflects the light of God. The real question is not what we know, but what we are. So as we reflect on Al-Ghazali, we might ask ourselves, what is the state of our hearts? What veils have we allowed to cloud our vision? What illusions keep us restless, chasing shadows instead of light? And are we willing, like him, to let reason bow before the mystery, to surrender our certainties, and to seek the knowledge that no book, no system, no argument can ever fully contain? Because in the end, as Al-Ghazali discovered, the truest philosophy is not written in words, but in the silent transformation of the heart.